Hello YouTube, this is Ryan with Eden Enclosures. I'm back with part 3 of this tutorial series, Armorcoat hard coating. This is what I talk, or in the other videos where I talk about using a brush on epoxy. So this is Armorcoat. It's a 2-part epoxy from Polygem. It's tintable. It turns rock hard when it's done. And it's mixed at a 50-50 ratio. Since I made this video, I also add in some thickening agent to thicken it up if need be. It's kind of on a as-is basis. I'll get into that in a minute. So anyway, when I first started doing this, or when I was doing this with this video, I was putting in the thickening agent first, and then I was mixing the 2 parts. This is a little bit of pigment that I add in there. You don't have to. I like it just to give kind of a base coat for it. So this is just black. I use kind of a rust colored one in my arid enclosures, but it's nice to be able to tint it a little different in between coats. It's easier to see where you've got and where you haven't. So this part of it is real thick, and this part is almost like a clear water. You can see I pushed through, and the bottoms is more like a really liquid stuff, and it's you got to mix it. It's a mess. This part is not the funnest part, but what I'll do is try and mix it up in the can as best I can before I put it in my bowl. As I was saying, since I've made this video, I actually have switched over to using a drill and a bit to do my mixing for me. I think it just gets a better mix when it's mixed by a machine than by hand. So I use a drill. I use an old flat spade bit. It works good for mixing it up. But this is the old-fashioned way. You just get it as mixed up as you can in this can. And in this video, I just kind of do it half and half. Now I measure everything. I have a scale, so I make sure that it's correct. And then I add the pigment and the powder after. So I have changed my method just a little bit since I started. But it's supposed to be 50-50 mix. It turns out, even if it's not exact, but it does seem to do a better job when it is exact. So I've now tried to, instead of just looking at the levels in each can, I tried to actually use a scale to do it. So it's pretty simple, just 1 part of each. The thickening powder thickens it up. When it's without the thickening powder, it tends to be kind of runny. So when you put it on a wall, it wants to drip and run down real bad, and it'll still drip even with thickening powder, but the thickening powder does help to make the consistency where it wants to stay on walls and vertical surfaces just a little bit better. So I use an old screwdriver. I use whatever's around, really. I'm not picky on what I use to mix with, but this works good. So once that pigment starts coming in a little bit more, it'll darken it up and turn it a black, almost not quite black, but dark gray. And like I said, I like to change the pigment just a little bit in between coats. It just makes it easier to see. I'm going to paint everything anyway, so it's not like end of the world if it doesn't, but it is nice to be able to see the difference between coats, especially as you can get into those little areas and stuff. So I usually do 2 to 3 coats, depending on what I'm doing. If it's walls where nothing's ever going to climb on them, 2 is probably fine. If it's a heavier traffic area, then usually you want to go 3, just so you have that extra thickness there. Sometimes even 4 if it's a bigger animal. So I just use a regular paintbrush. Use cheap ones, because once you're done with this, you just throw it away. So I try to buy cheapest paintbrushes I can. So applying, it's not real rocket science here. You're just sort of wiping it in and wiping it onto the cracks. I try to jam it into corners and tight spots, the cracks and stuff, a little bit better, and then the big areas you can just brush it on. And you're just going for coverage. Since you're going to do more than 1 coat, you can go back and get spots you miss, or if you need a little heavier in spots. But the key here is to just get it all covered. Now with this, don't mix more than you can use. This little bowl doesn't seem like much, but much more than that, and it'll harden up on you before you finish. So one thing you can watch is this epoxy, it heats up as it's starting to get close to setting. So if you feel that bowl getting warm and you still have a lot left, pick up the pace a little bit, try to get bigger areas or something, because I have had it harden up on me before. Also watch, even in that bowl, watch what you set it on. I've had it on a sheet of PVC before and it actually melted into the PVC. The bowl was fine, nothing came out, but it got hot enough that it melted it. And then I did a big bowl once, a huge batch. I figured I'll mix up a bunch, and it got hard before I could finish it. So this part is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You're just brushing it on and working it into all the cracks and crevices. Nothing real tricky about it. It is messy, so if you don't want it on something, cover it up. There really isn't any other real tricks to it or anything special you need to do. You don't need to texture it because it's thin enough that it'll still hold the textures. You can see that the texture of the foam is still showing through. So it's a good idea when you do cut your foam to cut a little deeper just for this, so you know, on fine details. But for the most part, it seems to hold the texture pretty well. So on my next coat, I will either not mix in pigment at all, or I'll do a lighter pigment or something just so I can see the differences between them. And I usually, once I'm done, I let it sit and dry overnight. It takes, I give it 24 hours usually to harden. If it's real warm in the summertime or something, sometimes you can do 2 coats in a day. It'll harden up in 8 hours or so, and you can actually get another coat on during the day, which is nice. And realistically, that's about it. Just brushing it on, getting it all the areas, and covering it real good. You don't need to cover the putty. It's already gone hard, but that's it. This method is just way faster than the putty. So in part 4, my favorite, we'll do some painting.